I'm back with another 10 little known games and sadly the last episode in Obscure Amiga Games series Season 2. Season 3 is coming in a little while, so don't worry about it ending permanently. For now, let's check the games out. Last Battle originally came out in the arcades before being ported to numerous home systems, Amiga indirectly being one of them. And it's a side-scrolling beat-em-up. As in most games of the kind, your motivation is love, because it makes the world turn and life carry on. Or is it money? Oh well, in this particular case, it is actually love. Because your girlfriend has been kidnapped and held captive by the lackeys of a villain of the game going by the name of the Duke. So you polish your horse-riding boots, stick your jeans tightly inside them and embark on a mission to save your love, while breaking jaws and throwing punches all around. A quote comes to mind: "I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass, and I'm all out of bubblegum." And that's not from Duke Nukem. I wonder how many of you know where it's from. Anyway, you're suited up, your biceps are oiled up and you're ready to go. So you must traverse numerous levels, punching and kicking through thousands of bodies to eventually defeat Duke's 3 generals who are behind the kidnapping. Most levels end with a boss, and most of them are straightforward left to right fare. Some require you to find an exit, but there are few and far between. Last Battle on the Amiga is a port from already pretty disappointing port on Sega Genesis, and Amiga's version is even worse. The graphics are below average for 1991, your kick and punch attacks range seems to be much shorter than that of your enemies, animation is not very smooth and the gameplay is just simply put boring and repeatable. If that wasn't enough, only half of the levels of original are present on our home system, and that's even before mentioning sounds and music, which surprisingly are not as bad as the rest of the game. Punches and kicks are appropriately meaty and music, while not great, is okay. But these two are far from enough to save this mistake of a game. So unless you're a beat-em-up nut and have to play them all, avoid Last Battle like a lactose-intolerant person avoids milk and cookies. And it's with vigilance, to say the least. I should know. Harley-Davidson The Road to Sturgis may have not been the highest scored game upon its release, but it definitely was an unusual one. Well, you need to go to Sturgis from Maine in 10 days for the famous Sturgis Harley-Davidson race, and it's not short of a ride, I must add. It's not really a racing game per se. It's a mixture of genres, and that's what it's so interesting about it. It's partly a game of the road, where you need to get from point A to point B avoiding road obstacles and cops. It's also partly a collection of various motorcycle-themed minigames that you can partake in cities where you refuel your bike at. And partly a simplistic RPG/biker simulation. So you have stats of riding, wealth, mechanics, charisma and brawling, between which you redistribute points at start of the game. And while this may look superficial and unnecessary, your choices here actually influence the gameplay quite considerably. High charisma, for instance, may help you talk your way out of a speeding ticket, and so on. In each of the stops you'll be able to upgrade your bike and your gear using money won in the aforementioned events, and it's best to soup up the beast as much as you can so that the other minigames on the way would be easier and in preparation for the Sturgis. When playing it for the first time, you may want to partake in all minigames. In subsequent playthroughs, it's best to only attempt those that you're good at, not to waste time and not to miss your destination in 10 days limit. Harley-Davidson is not a game that's easy to categorize, but its unusual mixture of genres makes it enjoyable to fire up once in a while and just to try to get a little bit further living your best biker life. I always liked Harley-Davidson's graphics, which may not be stunning, but they're nice enough to not take you out of the experience, and obviously the main title tune that just rocks. Hawkeye is a bi-directional horizontally scrolling action platformer that was as huge of a hit on C64 as big disappointment it was on the Amiga. Whoa, what a start. I'm Batman! Yes, Bruce, your game was better and also an action platformer. Planet Zamox has been invaded by the evil aliens known as Skurkris, and they've basically eradicated the native inhabitants. The leftovers hid in the underground caves to survive, to sustain, and eventually strike back. And you're in control of titular Hawkeye, a synthetic lifeform created to rid the planet of the alien scourge. So you'll have to complete all 12 levels, fighting off countless enemies which more often than not are thematically weird and feel out of place. You solve simple environmental puzzles by finding their pieces, there's 4 per each level, and you'll do it in a very 8-bit feeling gameplay loop. You're not defenseless, however, and have access to 4 weapons: a basic pistol, that's weak but has unlimited ammo, fast-shooting machine gun, powerful laser and devastating rocket launcher. The latter 3 require ammo, so when you run out, you're either back to pistol or have to find the refills. Hawkeye's graphics were out of date on arrival. They use very limited and blunt palette, and sprites tend to have 2-3 colors each only, which is not something that we expected from 16-bit games. Backgrounds were actually even more disappointing as compared to C64 Outing, because they lost their parallax layer and are just static, comfortably sitting behind the foreground. Overall, Hawkeye looks plain and boring. It's not a bad game, however, and if you would just moved from an 8-bit machine to Amiga and got to play it, you'd love it. Because it would be the gameplay loop you were familiar with already, in higher resolution and with better sounds. But if it wasn't your first experience with Commodore's 16-bit powerhouse, and you played anything else from Amiga's vast gaming library prior to seeing Hawkeye, you'll be disappointed. Highway Hoax is a surprisingly entertaining, action-packed shooter racer, and it's as simple of an arcade game as they come. All you have to do is to get to the end of the road, or each stretch of the road I should say, really in one piece and as fast as possible. After each level you can upgrade your car and its weapons by spending money earned while driving. How do you earn it, you may wonder? Well, if you drive plenty fast and finish a particular section with a good time, you'll get this as bonus. Also, damaging other cars rewards cash too. So be fast and deadly is what I'm trying to say here. New cars are available too, so while you start in your nondescript and fairly generic one, it can be swapped out for something flashier given you save up enough money. Both ammo and fuel are limited, so you have to make sure to keep them stocked up at all times. You can get extra fuel as pickup star tokens that you find and collect as you race, and ammo can be refilled by shooting trucks that often carry it. Not always though, and you're as likely to drive into an oil slick spilling from it instead of an ammo, so there's that. Since Highway Hoax is a game of time, and at a certain speed and skill point you won't be able to drive faster than is possible within the constraints of the game engine limitations, you can also get extra time, for those extra end-level money drops. You do so by jumping over scaffolds. They're not everywhere, but if you spot one, it's worth focusing on jumping over it, cause the old-timey saying proves once again true: time is money. Highway Hoax graphics are perhaps not great looking for what Amiga was capable of, but they're clean, easy on the eyes, and most importantly butter smoothly scrolling and scaling. Sounds disappoint a little, but not enough to detract from this otherwise fun and explosive experience. And if you like arcade games, or racing, or even shooters, Highway Hoax is well worth tracking down and playing. Insanityfied came out in 1987, so the very same year the famous A500 did. Keep that in mind, cause while I may complain a little about it, it's one of the oldest and first Amiga games in existence, so it deserves some leeway. Okay, since that's out of the way, Insanityfied is a vertically scrolling shooter. It doesn't bore you with its story too much, it's not trying to be something it's not, it's a straight up shoot 'em up and wants you to do just that: fly and shoot, until everything is destroyed and in ruin, or until you're killed, one of the two. There's no weapon upgrades as far as I know, though to be quite honest I've managed to complete the first level maybe a few times and you get an extra life every 15,000 points. Clearly not modern shooter showering you with new weapons, bombs, shields and other pickups. You can fly at varying speeds, which you can actually control, and that's not a given in a game as old as this one, and shoot. There are quite a few different enemies, some small, some bigger and some gigantic, and while they're different in how they look and pattern of their movement, they are for the most part the same within their respective weight classes. Oh, and there are even unmovable installations that you'll need to destroy, like turrets, guns and such. And that's it. No, really, that's the whole game. You fly, you shoot and try to survive, you get the points, then eventually you die and the game ends. And while it could be considered to be too basic to be playable in 2023 or even a year or so after it came out, I think that it's earned its place in Amiga's history and can be a fun challenge against a friend for points in your classic gaming rotation. If you have one, that is. And someone to play against too. That's probably the most important part of it all. Anyway, Insanityfied is anything but insanity. It's plain in its design, graphics and sounds. Especially the latter two seem uninspired and uninteresting, but it's not a bad game. It's just old and a victim of an early design when devs didn't know how to properly utilize Amiga's specialized chips yet. Hellraisers is a game of dual identities, kinda like Bruce Wayne. He's a billionaire philanthropist inventor by day, and a cross-dresser BDSM-loving, leather-wearing vigilante man-bat at night. I'm Batman! Oh, Bruce, I meant BDSM in a good way. He's so touchy-feely these days, guys, sorry. Anyway, Hellraisers is just that, Hellraisers, on the title screen, and then throughout the rest of the game it calls itself Liberators, in huge lettering staring directly in your face. So in the end, I have no idea what it is, other than the sci-fi side-view action shooter. Oh, and let me save you some time, it's really bad. No, really, it is. Half of the time you're walking in some kind of a space-themed complex, shooting oddly looking bodies like this half-minigun, half-bipedal cow-faced monstrosity, turrets and flying thingy-magics looking like those balls Luke Skywalker trained his lightsaber skills on, they're weird. And this first main part of the game feels like something made solely to lure 8-bit gamers to buy an Amiga. So it features gigantic colorful sprites, decent animation and plenty of shooting, and positively 8-bit gameplay design of screen flicking, walking and doing not much else. And the second half is this simple and blunt horizontally scrolling shooter. At least you get some upgrades in it, but other than those, it's even less interesting than the main game. I mean, there was a time when I used to work in a small company and we designed games for Android and iOS. We only released a few and I don't think any of them are available anymore, but the first one we dropped, and it was a terrible piece of trash I must add, was this space-themed shooter called Redneck's Revenge. Now see how we've committed to the title? It was called that and just that. It had a set of levels, different enemies, explosions, upgrades and a very simple loop. It was not a good game, but it was still heaps better than this is. So yeah, play it, don't play it, I honestly don't care. Hellraisers may not be the worst obscure game, cause we have Pro Soccer 2190 being just that, but it's definitely one worth being forgotten. Same as the Janosik from the previous video, both are equally pointless, and you can quote me on that. Powder is a sci-fi horizontally scrolling shoot 'em up that would have been huge if it came out 5 years earlier in 1993 when Amiga was still alive and kicking. Well, at least for another year it was. And not in 1998, when most system users long moved to PCs or PlayStation. In 1998, when there were literally 17 Amiga users left, only 12 of them liked shoot 'em ups and 9 out of 12 horizontally scrolling ones. So a game to satisfy their hunger had to be excellent. And Powder is not. It's not bad, do not mistake what I'm saying. It's quite good and playable in fact, even if a bit more difficult than I'd like, it's just not great. And good in 1998 was not enough. And that's why we're here talking about it in this very video. Powder features 6 pretty large levels, with both mid and end level bosses to beat, dozens of differently looking and behaving enemies. Developers boasted on the game cover about their supposed intelligence, but I haven't noticed anything in particular that would suggest that they're smarter than those in most other games. But they're not bad, and like I mentioned, the game is plenty difficult already. Mainly because of how many enemies are at once on the screen and how many bullets they spew each way, often covering more than half of a screen with them. There are no real weapon upgrades to speak of in Powder, instead it's using a system of 5 cyclable weapons, always available at hand's reach. Or foot's reach, I should say really, as you toggle between them with a spacebar. And you always press your spacebar in Amiga games with your foot. It's a rule, don't look it up, it's true. Anyway, Powder's graphics are interesting, they range from excellent to a little below average when it comes to backgrounds, and it's difficult to confidently tell why. Was it a budget constraints, or the fact that it had 2 graphic artists and one was better than the other, or maybe just lack of development time? We'll never know, but the fact remains that they're a mixed bag. Everything in the foreground though, all sprites are really nice. And for a game that runs on all Amigas with at least 1 MB of RAM, you can't really ask for more. Sounds are okay and the music is surprisingly catchy. I mean, there are better and worse tracks, but all of them feel appropriate for the action that's on the screen and fit well. I like Powder. Not enough to consider it the top 10 shooters on the Amiga, but enough not to launch it as a filler between other better games, but as just one of the games. An innocent man was charged for a crime he didn't commit and sentenced to banishment on a prison planet. It's been ravaged by nuclear wars years earlier and is currently used as a holding for the most dangerous prisoners in the galaxy, and generally speaking considered unfit for repopulation. You play as said prisoner. Let's call him Kikolas Nage, a long-lost cousin of Nicolas Cage. So Kikolas, being the captive in a world out to get him, after hearing of a mysterious ship that crash-landed somewhere on the surface and indirectly could be used as means of escape, sets off to find 8 parts of said ship's missing escape pod, to use them to regain his freedom and leave the barren planet. Prison is an action-adventure that looks incredibly and plays like heavily zoomed-in flashback, with much less combat and considerably more inventory puzzling. It's smart puzzling though, so if you put your mind to it, there'll be no trial and error here, cause all the solutions are rooted in logic. That said, they are not overly difficult, so you should never feel like you're left without an idea of how to progress further. Oh, and save often. Trust me on that one, save often. Now, like I said, combat is not something you'll be partaking in particularly often, so most of the time you'll spend walking around, solving puzzles, gathering items and exploring the planet. And most of that you'll be all alone. Prison is a game that despite its title does not keep you locked up, but never really loses that overwhelming feeling of desolation, loneliness that prisoners tend to experience. It's a dark reality that it portrays and a difficult situation for Kikolas Nage to find a way out of. It may not be the fastest and most action-packed game out there, but it's definitely one of the most unique. And with post-apocalyptic themed graphics and decent sound design, it creates an atmosphere unlike any other.
I would recommend it to anyone to try it out, but the pace game plays at may not be for those who crave action. At times it can feel snail slow. But if that's not an issue, definitely seek it out and play it. From 1993, everyone who had an Amiga wanted just one thing. A girlfriend. No, not it. A PC. No, also not it. Oh, I know, a faster Amiga. Well, yes, that's technically correct, but also not what I'm on about. Batman went to the toilet, and it will be a while, so I have to simulate those dialogues with myself. I don't have anyone else here really to talk to. Anyway, all Amiga gamers wanted Doom. And no Amiga gamers got Doom for quite a few years more. But we started getting games trying to be Doom, or at least simulate the experience as close to it as it was possible on an Amiga that was not hardware capable of using same display techniques PCs were. And among many better ones like the Citadel or Gloom, we've got those that did everything but shine too. And one of those rusty, dirt-covered and generally speaking disappointing attempts was 1995's Polish game Project Battlefield. A 4-man development team is arguably too small for such a game, and yet they've taken upon themselves to try. And they sorta succeed. I mean, everything worked, but everything also felt as if it was in 0.7 alpha version rather than retail 1.0. On a plus side, Project Battlefield can be played even on A500 in a sexy looking stamp-sized window, with what feels like a handful of pixels at most. Sure, it's not ideal, but it works. Stronger Amigas obviously allowed to run the game in bigger screens, but upon game's release, there was no system that could play Project Battlefield in full screen in 50 FPS. Sure, now we can emulate the hell out of Amiga and have it as fast as it could never originally be, but back then it proved only that the game's in-house engine was anything but optimized. Still, like I said initially, it ran, and for many gamers that was enough. As soon as they started playing the game, they've no doubt started noticing other little annoyances, like the fact that your character doesn't walk but rather glides, slides or hovers over the ground, and there is no visual feedback to any of the shots that you land on the enemies, or they do on you either. And in game where HP is very crucial and you spend most of your time shooting and avoiding getting shot yourself, knowing when you hit and when you're hit is fundamental. If you add to it generic looking enemies, very Wolfenstein 3D-like 90 degrees only walls, and underwhelming gameplay, you'll realize why it's an obscure game. Oh, I forgot about the story. You know what, it was as boring as the shooting, so I will ignore it and just jump straight into our next game. The Punisher, everyone's favorite anti-hero. A vigilante, a warrior for the right and just, where law has failed. Also a psychopath who went totally bonkers, bent on revenge against all evil after witnessing his whole family killed right in front of his eyes. I mean, he's not the first, Man-Bat went through the same thing, but Bruce was considerably wealthier and could afford a therapy and tons upon tons of deadly gadgets other than the guns to truly express the depth of his craziness. Would I do the same thing they did? Hard to tell, and I'm not keen on learning. But it had to be said that they're both clearly damaged and found a very niche and dangerous way of coping with their grief. Punisher, the game, promises a lot with its torn straight out of comic book cover beautiful title screen, then it over-promises even more with a weapon selection before the mission. It all sets mood for an explosive and fun, action-packed game that will glue the player to the screen for hours, maybe days. But if I had 5 cents for every promise that either failed to deliver or was overhyped I've encountered, I'd had close to $7 now, or €5, depends where you are. Sure, the overall presentation, so graphics and sounds, at least in my opinion, are pretty good for 1990, and the Operation Wolf-like gameplay is an excellent gameplay fit for the brutal and deadly character, but when you launch the game and play it for a little while, you'll realize that it just feels wrong. And it's hard to tell why exactly. The controls leave a lot to be desired, feeling as if they were not made for this game, just adjusted to fit within its constraints. And everything else is so devoid of fluidity and so jerky, it's a pain to watch in motion. It feels like devs got a license to use Frank Castle and $322 to make a game out of it. Cause if that was the budget for it, then it's excellent. But if it was anything more, then it's not great. All that said, arguably speaking, it's still much more of a game than some other obscure games are, as basically everything works here. It just doesn't work the way I would have hoped it would. It's not a bad game per se, but it's definitely not good. And believe it or not, but in less than 2 months we've completed another full season of obscure Amiga games. I'll release the single video with all 10 episodes rolled into one soon, but for now let me know what you think of this one, and especially games in it, cause I'm curious, we always have interesting back and forths in the comments below, and I read all of them.
If you liked the video, hit those like and subscribe buttons below. If you didn't, well, then there's thumbs down there too. But I suppose you wouldn't have persevered up to this point if you really didn't. Around 60% of you are not subscribed, and there's currently no way of knowing if YouTube will decide to recommend you the next episode or not, other than subscribing and hitting that bell, that is. And when you hit that bell, whenever the new video is out, YouTube will actually send you a small and friendly notification about it, so you wouldn't miss it. If you'd like to support the channel, Patreon and YouTube memberships are a great way of doing so. They will help me release better content, and also they get first dibs on all new videos before they're publicly accessible on YouTube. If you can't or don't want to do that though, likes and subscribes are great too. I would like to take a moment here and thank all the YouTube creators from whose videos short bits were taken to serve as a background to my commentary. They're amazing and stars among the retro community. You will find names of their channels at the top of the screen when their footage is running, and also in the video description below. For me though, this is all, so have a good one and I'll see you next time. Peace.